There are moments in life when desperation makes you do things you'd never consider. When the walls close in so tight that you stop thinking about consequences and start thinking about survival. For Chidinma, that moment came on a Tuesday afternoon in Seoul, standing outside a convenience store with $32 in her bank account and an eviction notice burning a hole in her backpack. She had come to South Korea chasing a dream, teaching English, experiencing a new culture, building a life far away from the expectations that had suffocated her back in Lagos. But dreams have a funny way of crumbling when rent comes due and your employer decides foreign workers are too expensive to keep around. The job posting appeared on her phone like a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. Personal assistant needed for 1 week. Compensation, $5,000, must be available immediately. Discretion required. $5,000 for 1 week of work. Chidinma stared at that number until her vision blurred. $5,000 would solve everything. The rent. The plane ticket home she was too proud to ask her family to buy. The shame of returning as a failure, but nothing legitimate paid that much for that little time. She knew this. Everyone knew this. She applied anyway. The response came within an hour. An address in Gangnam, tomorrow at noon. Bring identification. Tell no one. That last part should have been the warning. Tell no one. Those 3 words carried the weight of every bad decision that had ever been made by someone desperate enough to ignore red flags. But Chidinma was past the point of caution. She was in free fall, and this was the only hand reaching out to catch her. The building in Gangnam didn't look sinister. It was sleek, modern, the kind of place where wealthy people made wealthy decisions behind tinted glass and marble facades. Security cameras tracked her movement from the moment she stepped through the revolving doors. The lobby smelled like expensive cologne and fresh flowers that probably cost more than her monthly rent. A woman in a tailored suit met her at the elevator. No smile, no introduction, just a subtle gesture to follow. They rode to the 34th floor in silence so complete that Chidinma could hear her own heartbeat drumming against her ribs. She tried to steady her breathing, tried to project confidence she didn't feel, but her reflection in the polished elevator doors showed the truth. A 26-year-old woman in clothes she'd worn 3 times that week, standing next to someone who belonged in this world while she was clearly just visiting. The elevator doors opened directly into a penthouse office. Floor-to-ceiling, windows overlooked Seoul like a kingdom waiting to be claimed. And sitting behind a desk that probably cost more than a car was the man who would change everything. Kang Minyu. He didn't look up immediately, just continued reading whatever document had his attention, making her wait, making her feel small. It was a power play and they both knew it. Chidinma used the time to study him, mid-30s, sharp jaw, hair pushed back in that effortlessly perfect way that required actual effort. Expensive watch, expensive suit, expensive everything. But it was his eyes that caught her when he finally looked up. Cold, calculating, the kind of eyes that had seen things most people only watched in movies. Chidinma Akhefer, he said, her name rolling off his tongue with an accent that softened the syllables. You're Nigerian. It wasn't a question. Yes. Your visa expires in 3 weeks. Her stomach dropped. How did he know that? She'd said nothing about her visa situation in the application. Nothing about the desperation scratching at her throat every time she thought about deportation. I need someone for exactly 6 days, Minyu continued, leaning back in his chair with the casual confidence of a man who always got what he wanted. My younger sister is getting married this weekend. Family obligation requires I bring a date, someone who can play a role, someone who understands discretion. You're hearing someone to pretend to be your girlfriend, Chidinma said flatly. I'm hearing someone to attend a wedding and make my family happy. What others assume is their business. Why not ask someone you actually know? For the first time, something flickered across his face. Not quite emotion, but close. Because everyone I know comes with complications. You're leaving the country in 3 weeks. Temporary, clean, perfect. The word hung in the air between them. Perfect. As if her desperation was an asset. As if her impending departure was a selling point rather than a source of anxiety that kept her awake at night. What exactly would this involve? She asked. You attend the wedding as my guest. You smile. You make small talk. You convince my mother that I'm not the disappointment she thinks I am. Then you take your money and disappear back to wherever you came from. The dismissiveness in that last sentence should have made her angry, should have made her walk out, but $5,000 doesn't care about pride. And if I say no? Minyu smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Then you say no, the door is behind you, but we both know you won't, because 3 weeks from now you'll be on a plane home with nothing to show for your time here except debt and regret. This is your solution. Take it or leave it. He wasn't wrong. That was the worst part. He'd read her situation like a balance sheet and calculated her worth down to the exact dollar amount she'd accept to compromise her dignity. And he was right. She would take it. She had to take it. When do I start? Tomorrow, my assistant will provide everything you need. Clothes, background information, acceptable topics of conversation. My family has expectations. You'll need to meet them. The car that picked her up the next morning was worth more than everything Chidinma had ever owned combined. Black, polished, the kind of vehicle that turned heads and parted traffic. She sat in the back seat feeling like an imposter in borrowed skin, watching Seoul blur past tinted windows while her mind raced through everything that could go wrong. The assistant from yesterday, whose name she'd learned was Miss Park, sat beside her with a tablet and an expression that suggested this was just another Wednesday. Just another girl being prepped to play pretend for a man who bought solutions to his problems. Mr. Kang's family is traditional, Miss Park said without looking up from her screen. His father passed away 8 years ago. His mother, Mrs. Kang Jeon, now runs the family business interests. She has very specific expectations for her children. What kind of business? Chidinma asked. Miss Park's pause was almost imperceptible. Import and export, various industries, the family has diversified holdings. It was the kind of non-answer that screamed of things better left unquestioned. Chidinma had grown up around enough smooth talkers to recognize evasion when she heard it. Import and export could mean anything, usually meant everything. And the way Miss Park's jaw tightened slightly suggested the everything included things that didn't appear on tax returns. His sister, Kang Seoyeon, is marrying into another prominent family, Miss Park continued. The wedding will have approximately 300 guests. You'll be introduced as someone Mr. Kang met through business connections. Keep your answers vague but pleasant. You're a consultant. You advise on international markets. African emerging economies are your specialty. I teach English to children, Chidinma said. You used to teach English to children. For this week, you advise on international markets. Memorize this. Miss Park handed her a folder thick with documents, background information, talking points, an entirely fabricated professional history that sounded impressive enough to justify why someone like Minyu would date someone like her. The next 3 days were a crash course in becoming someone else. Shopping trips to boutiques where the staff knew Miss Park by name and treated Chidinma with a kind of polite condescension reserved for projects rather than people. They draped her in dresses that cost more than her student loans, taught her which fork to use at formal dinners, corrected her posture, her handshake, the way she laughed. Too loud, Miss Park said after one practice session. Laugh like you're sharing a secret, not announcing a joke. Chidinma wanted to laugh loud just to spite her, wanted to remind them all that she was doing them a favor, not the other way around. But $5,000 bought a lot of compliance, so she laughed quietly, smiled demurely, became whatever they needed her to become. Minyu himself appeared only twice during those 3 days. Once to approve her wardrobe selections with all the emotion of someone choosing furniture. Once to practice introductions and basic couple interactions that felt more like a military briefing than anything romantic. We met 6 months ago, he said, standing close enough that she could smell his cologne. Something dark and expensive. Business conference in Singapore. You were presenting on market opportunities in West Africa. I was impressed by your insights. Did you ask me out or did I ask you? Chidinma asked. I asked you to dinner. You said yes. We've been seeing each other casually since then. Nothing serious. Just enjoying each other's company when our schedules align. The lie rolled off his tongue so smoothly it almost sounded true. Chidinma wondered how many lies he told in a day, how many versions of reality he maintained. There was something exhausting about standing so close to someone so practiced at deception. "Touch me," he said suddenly. She blinked. "What?" "We're supposed to be dating. You need to be comfortable with casual physical contact. Put your hand on my arm." She did. His suit jacket was soft beneath her fingers, expensive fabric that probably required special cleaning. She could feel the muscle beneath it. Solid. Real. For a moment, the absurdity of the situation hit her fully. Here she was, touching a stranger's arm in a penthouse in Seoul, pretending to be someone she wasn't so she could afford to leave the country that was kicking her out. "Better," Minyu said, and she realized she'd let her hand linger. She pulled back quickly, and something that might have been amusement flickered across his face before disappearing behind the usual mask. "The wedding is tomorrow. Car picks you up at 3. Don't be late." Then he was gone, leaving her standing in the middle of his office with Miss Park, and the growing suspicion that she'd agreed to something far more complicated than a simple fake date. The wedding was being held at a hotel that looked like it had been designed by someone who thought subtlety was for poor people. Chandeliers that could probably be seen from space. Everything was marble. Gold accents that caught the light and screamed wealth in 14 different languages. Chidinma arrived in a dress the color of midnight, her hair styled into submission, her face painted by professionals who'd made her look like an elegant stranger. Minyu was waiting in the lobby. He wore a tuxedo like it was a second skin, and when his eyes found her through the crowd, something unreadable passed across his face. Not quite approval, not quite surprise, something in between that made her suddenly aware of her own heartbeat. "You look presentable," he said when she reached him. "You look like someone who pays people to tell him he looks good," she replied without thinking. His eyebrow raised slightly. "Sharp tongue. Save it for after we're around my family. Right now, you need to look like you're happy to be here." "I'm thrilled, can't you tell?" "Chidinma," he said her name again, that slight softening of syllables. "This matters, act accordingly." She wanted to argue, wanted to remind him that she was doing him the favor here, that her dignity had a price, but it wasn't cheap. But then his hand found the small of her back, warm through the fabric of her dress, and he guided her toward the ballroom where 300 people were waiting to judge them both. The first person to approach them was a woman in her 60s wearing pearls that could probably fund a small hospital. Her smile was warm, but her eyes were surgical instruments, dissecting Chidinma from head to toe in 3 seconds flat. "Minyuya," she said, and the softness in her voice when addressing him was immediately replaced by cool appraisal when she turned to Chidinma. "You must be the friend my son has been hiding from us." "Mother," Minyu said, and his hand tightened almost imperceptibly against Chidinma's back. "This is Chidinma. Chidinma, my mother, Kang Jiyeon." Chidinma extended her hand and smiled the smile Miss Park had made her practice. Warm but not too eager, confident but not challenging. "It's an honor to meet you, Mrs. Kang. Minyu has told me so much about you." "Has he?" Mrs. Kang's handshake was brief and measuring. "How interesting. He's told me almost nothing about you. I didn't even know you existed until 3 days ago when he mentioned he'd be bringing someone to Seoyeon's wedding." The criticism was wrapped in silk, but it was still a blade. Chidinma felt Minyu tense beside her. "I prefer to keep my personal life private," he said. Clearly, Mrs. Kang's attention returned to Chidinma with the intensity of a hawk spotting movement in tall grass. "You're Nigerian, I understand. How did you end up in Seoul?" This was the script, the rehearsed answer, but something about the way Mrs. Kang asked the question made Chidinma want to tell the truth instead. To say she'd come here young and hopeful and stupid. Believing the world was bigger than the box people wanted to put her in. That she'd failed spectacularly and was now standing here in a borrowed dress, lying to strangers for money. Instead, she said, "I work in international business consulting. Seoul is an important market for African-Asian trade relations. I came for work and ended up staying longer than planned." "And how did you meet my son?" "Singapore Business Conference," Chidinma said smoothly. "He was the most interesting person in a very boring room." It wasn't part of the script, the last sentence. It just slipped out, true in a way that surprised her. Because despite everything, despite the coldness and the calculation and the obvious criminality radiating from everything in his orbit, Minyu was interesting. Dangerously so. Mrs. Kang's expression shifted slightly. Not quite approval, but something adjacent to it. Well, we'll have time to get to know each other better during the reception. The ceremony is about to begin. Minyu, make sure you introduce Chidinma to your uncle before dinner. She glided away like a queen dismissing courtiers, leaving a wake of expensive perfume and unspoken expectations. Your uncle, Chidinma whispered as they moved toward their seats. My father's brother. He runs the, logistics division of the family business. The way Minyu said logistics made it clear that was another word for things better left unquestioned. He'll ask you inappropriate questions and drink too much, smile and deflect. This family sounds delightful. You have no idea. The ceremony was beautiful in the way that unlimited money could make anything beautiful. Flowers everywhere. String quartet playing something classical and mournful. Sioyin looked like a porcelain doll in a dress that probably cost more than a car, and her groom looked appropriately besotted in that way grooms are supposed to look. But Chidinma couldn't focus on the romance. She was too busy watching Minyu watch his sister. There was something in his expression she hadn't seen before, something almost soft, almost vulnerable. The mask slipped just enough to show a real person underneath, and that person looked like he was watching someone he loved walk into a future he wasn't sure about. You care about her, Chidinma whispered. Minyu's jaw tightened. She's my sister. That's not what I asked. He turned to look at her fully for the first time since they'd sat down, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. You're not here to psychoanalyze me. You're here to smile and make my mother think I'm capable of normal human relationships. Are you? No. The honesty was so unexpected that Chidinma almost laughed. Almost. But then the ceremony was ending and everyone was applauding, and Minyu was standing and offering his hand to help her up, and they were being swept into the crowd of well-dressed people heading toward the reception hall. The next 2 hours were a blur of introductions and careful lies. Business associates with dead eyes and warm handshakes. Family friends who asked pointed questions about future plans. Distant relatives who looked at Chidinma like she was an exotic pet Minyu had brought to show off. She smiled until her face hurt, laughed quietly at appropriate moments, played her role so well that she almost forgot it was a role. Uncle Kang was exactly as advertised, drunk, inappropriate. He cornered her near the bar while Minyu was talking to someone important across the room. So you're the one who finally caught our Minyu's attention, he slurred, his breath thick with whiskey. Pretty girl, very pretty. Tell me, what does a Nigerian consultant know about our business? Enough to know better than to discuss it at a wedding, Chidinma replied smoothly. He laughed, actually laughed, a genuine, surprised sound. Smart, good, Minyu needs smart, he's too serious, too much like his father, you know what happened to his father. I know he passed away. Passed away. Uncle Kang spat the euphemism like it tasted bad. He was killed, bullet to the head, business dispute that got messy. They never found who did it, but everyone knows. Everyone always knows. This family, this business, it's built on blood and secrets. You understand? Blood and secrets. Chidinma's heart was suddenly racing. This was real. Not speculation or suspicion, but confirmation of what she'd been trying not to think about for 3 days. Minyu wasn't just wealthy. He was dangerous. His family wasn't just powerful. They were criminals. And she was standing in the middle of it all, wearing a dress they'd bought her, telling lies they'd written for her. Uncle, Minyu's voice cut through the moment like ice water. He appeared beside them with that unnaturally smooth movement that suggested he'd been trained to approach quietly. You're drunk. Go home. I'm telling your girlfriend the truth. She deserves to know what kind of family she's getting involved with. She's not getting involved with anything, and you're embarrassing yourself. Uncle Kang studied them both with bloodshot eyes that were still sharp enough to see too much. You like her, actually like her. I can tell. Your father had the same look when he met your mother, right before everything went to hell. Minyu's hand closed around Chidinma's elbow, firm but not rough, and he guided her away from his uncle without another word. They moved through the crowd like water finding its path, slipping between conversations and avoiding eye contact until they reached a balcony overlooking the Seoul skyline. The night air was cold, sharp. It cut through the warmth of the reception hall and the fog of too many lies told in too short a time. I'm sorry, Minyu said, and the apology sounded like it cost him something. Is it true, Chidinma asked, about your father? He didn't answer immediately, just stared out at the city lights like they held answers he was still looking for. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than she'd ever heard it. My father built an empire on broken rules and calculated risks. He made enemies, a lot of them. And yes, one of those enemies killed him. I was 27. Sioyan was 19. My mother hasn't been the same since. And you took over. Someone had to. The business doesn't run itself. People depend on us. Legitimate people with legitimate jobs that feed their families. But yes, there are other parts. Parts I'm not proud of. Parts I can't walk away from even if I wanted to. Chidinma should have been afraid. Every logical bone in her body screamed that she should make an excuse, walk out, take whatever money they'd give her and run. But instead, she found herself asking, "Do you want to?" "Wanna what?" "Walk away." Minyu turned to look at her, and in the dim light from the reception hall, his face looked younger, more human, less like the cold businessman and more like someone carrying weight he never asked for. Every single day. But wanting something and being able to have it are different things. You should understand that. You wanted to build a life here. How's that working out? It was cruel, accurate, but cruel. Chudunma felt the sting of it settle somewhere behind her ribs. "You're paying me to be your fake girlfriend, not your therapist." "No, I'm paying you to make my mother happy for one night so my sister can have her perfect wedding without family drama. But you're turning out to be more complicated than I expected." "Complicated how?" "You don't act afraid of me. Everyone acts afraid of me. It's exhausting." "Should I be afraid of you?" He considered this, really considered it. "Probably. I'm not a good person, Chudunma. I've done things that would make you lose sleep. I'll do more things before this is all over. But for what it's worth, you're safe. I don't hurt innocent people." "How do you define innocent?" "People who aren't in the game. People who don't know the rules. People like you." "You don't know anything about me." "I know you came to Seoul with dreams bigger than your bank account. I know you worked 3 jobs trying to make rent. I know you send money home to your mother every month even when you can barely afford food for yourself. I know you're too proud to ask for help and too stubborn to quit even when you should. I know everything about you, Chudunma. I don't make business decisions without research." She should have been angry at the invasion of privacy, should have been disturbed by how thoroughly he'd dissected her life. But instead, she felt something else entirely. Seen. Actually seen for the first time in months, not as a foreigner, not as a failure, just as herself with all her flaws and struggles laid bare. "Why did you really hire me?" she asked. "You could have hired a professional, an actress, someone trained for this." "Because professionals are too good at lying. My mother would have seen through it in 5 minutes. But you—" He stepped closer, and suddenly the balcony felt very small. "You're a terrible liar. Everything you feel shows on your face, and somehow that makes you more believable. When you smiled at my mother and said I was interesting, you meant it. She could tell, I could tell." "You're not paying me enough for honesty." "How much would it cost?" The question hung between them, loaded with implications neither of them wanted to examine too closely. Below them, Seoul sprawled out in a million lights, each one representing a life, a story, a person trying to survive in a city that didn't care about their dreams. Chudunma thought about her apartment with the broken heating, about the job offers that never came, about the plane ticket home that felt like admitting defeat. "More than you have," she said finally. Minyu smiled, actually smiled, not the calculated business smile or the cold, dismissive one, but something real and surprising. "I have a lot." "Money isn't everything," says someone who's never had enough of it. Says someone who knows what it costs to sell yourself piece by piece until there's nothing left that's actually yours. The smile faded. He looked at her like he was seeing something he recognized, something that mirrored back his own reflection in ways he didn't want to acknowledge. "You should go back inside. People will talk if we're gone too long." "Let them talk." "You don't understand how this works. Perception is everything. One wrong move and the story changes. Suddenly you're not my girlfriend, you're my latest mistake, and my mother collects mistakes like ammunition." Chudunma wanted to argue, wanted to stay on this balcony in the cold Seoul night and keep peeling back layers of this complicated, dangerous, surprisingly human man. But the balcony door opened and Miss Park appeared, her expression professionally neutral but her eyes urgent. "Mr. Kung, Your mother is asking for you both. The toasts are about to begin." Back inside, the reception had reached that comfortable chaos of weddings where everyone's had enough champagne to forget formality. Spuppan glowed with happiness, her new husband's arm around her waist, both of them young and hopeful in a way that made Chudunma's chest ache. Minyu stood and gave a toast that was perfect, eloquent, exactly the right balance of humor and sentiment. He spoke about family and love and futures built on foundations stronger than fear. It was beautiful. It was also completely hollow. Chudunma watched him perform and wondered how many versions of himself he maintained, how many masks he wore, and underneath them all, if there was still someone real or if the performance had become the person. When he sat back down, his hand found hers under the table. Not for show, not because anyone was watching, just a connection, skin on skin, two people pretending to be something they weren't while everyone around them pretended not to notice. "Thank you," he said quietly, his thumb brushing across her knuckles. "For what?" "For not running. Most people would have run by now. The night's not over yet." But even as she said it, Chudunma knew she wouldn't run. Not tonight. Maybe not ever. Because somewhere between the lies and the performance and the cold calculation, something had shifted. Something that felt dangerous in a completely different way than his criminal empire or his family's blood-soaked history. She was starting to care. The reception wound down slowly. Spuppan and her husband left in a shower of rose petals and well wishes. Guests filtered out in expensive cars, heading back to their expensive lives. Mrs. Kung cornered them one last time before leaving. "Chudunma," she said, and her voice was softer than it had been all night. "You made my son smile today, really smile. I haven't seen that in 8 years. Whatever happens between you two, thank you for that." Then she was gone, leaving them standing in an emptying ballroom, surrounded by the debris of celebration. "I'll have the driver take you home," Minyu said. "What about you?" "I have work to do. The business doesn't stop for weddings." "At midnight." "The best business happens at midnight." He was slipping back into the mask, back into the cold, calculating persona that ran an empire built on secrets and blood. Chudunma could see it happening in real time, watching the human parts of him retreat behind walls designed to keep people out. "Minyu," she said, and he stopped, turned, looked at her with those eyes that had seen too much. "Your uncle was wrong, you're not like your father." "How would you know?" "Because your father would never have hired someone like me. He would have hired someone perfect, someone who fit. You hired someone real. That means something." For a long moment, he just looked at her. Then he stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him, close enough that her breath caught in her throat. "The job was for 6 days," he said. "We're only halfway through." "I know. I want to extend the contract." "For how long?" "I don't know yet, but longer. I'll pay more, whatever you need." Chudunma should have said no, should have taken her money and run before things got more complicated than they already were. But she was tired of running, tired of pretending that survival was the same thing as living. "I don't want more money," she said. "Then what do you want?" "The truth, about who you are, not the performance, not the mask, just you." Minyu's jaw tightened. "You won't like what you find." "Maybe not, but I'm tired of lies, even the ones I tell myself." He reached up and touched her face, his fingers gentle against her cheek. It was the first time he'd touched her without an audience, without a reason, just touch for the sake of touching. "You're going to ruin me," he said softly. "Good," Chudunma replied. "You could use a little ruin." And then he kissed her. Not for show, not for his mother or the guests or anyone except themselves. It was desperate and honest and terrifying in its intensity. It tasted like champagne and secrets and the beginning of something neither of them knew how to navigate. When they finally pulled apart, Minyu rested his forehead against hers, both of them breathing hard. "This is a terrible idea," he said. "The worst," she agreed. "We're going to destroy each other." "Probably. I can't promise you anything resembling normal." "I don't want normal. Normal has been slowly killing me for months." He laughed, quietly, a sound she'd never heard from him before. Then he took her hand and led her out of the ballroom, past the cleanup crew and the sleepy hotel staff, into the soul night where anything felt possible. They didn't have answers, didn't have plans, didn't have anything except each other and the dawning realization that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is let yourself be honest. But for tonight, in a city that never slept with a future uncertain as smoke, it was enough. If you found value in this story of desperation, deception, and unexpected connection, don't just close the tab. Hit subscribe, because the best stories are the ones that remind us that sometimes survival means taking risks we never planned for, and sometimes those risks change everything.